Don't drink that. The man behind you paid to watch you die. Grant Calloway's crystal glass paused less than an inch from his mouth. Around them, the wedding reception continued beneath chandeliers bright enough to turn the marble ballroom into a palace of gold. Politicians laughed beside syndicate captains. Champagne flowed. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable, while armed men pretended not to watch every entrance. No one noticed the male Omega standing beside Grant had stopped breathing. Elliot Mercer looked exactly as the rumors had promised. Delicate, pale, and too fragile for the Calloway world. Ash-blonde hair framed a narrow face, and his white ceremonial suit made him seem almost unreal beneath the warm lights. His fingers trembled around the stem of his untouched glass, but his eyes were fixed on the reflection in Grant's whiskey. A waiter stood 3 steps behind him. Black gloves, polished shoes. No scent. Wrong. Grant did not turn. His expression remained composed, the same cold mask he had worn through the vows, the photographs, and the speeches about peace between 2 families that had spent years trying to destroy each other. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. Elliot's pulse struck hard against his throat. 90 days. That was how long Grant Calloway had left to live. The knowledge did not come from instinct. It came from a novel Elliot had finished reading hours before dying in another world. In that story, the Mafia boss married a sickly Omega to settle a family debt. 3 months later, the Omega died under suspicious circumstances. Grant followed him into the grave during the memorial service. Elliot had awakened inside that doomed husband's body that morning. He had planned to survive by remaining invisible. Then the waiter touched 2 fingers to his cuff. A signal. The man near the northern pillar lowered his gaze. Second shooter. Elliot moved before he could reconsider. His shoulder struck Grant's chest, and the whiskey glass slipped from the Alpha's hand. It shattered across the ivory floor. Amber liquid spread between their shoes as Elliot sagged against him with a soft, broken gasp. The performance was effortless. A weak Omega overwhelmed by attention. A frightened bridegroom unable to endure a Mafia wedding. Several guests turned. Someone whispered his name. Grant caught him around the waist before he could fall, his grip steady and uncomfortably strong. The waiter stepped back. Too late. Elliot saw a drop of spilled whiskey touch the silver edge of the serving tray. The metal darkened almost instantly. Poison. "Clear the room," Grant said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Music died in the middle of a note. Conversations collapsed. Calloway guards moved through the crowd with swift discipline, sealing doors and separating staff from guests. The waiter ran. Elliot lifted his head from Grant's shoulder. "Left corridor," he whispered. Grant's men followed without hesitation. Only then did Grant look down at him. His scent rolled through the air, cedar, smoke, and controlled violence. Most Omegas would have lowered their eyes. Elliot did not. Grant's stare sharpened. "You saw him poison my drink." It was not a question. Elliot let his knees weaken again. "I saw something strange. You identified an assassin in a crowded ballroom. I was afraid." Grant's thumb pressed against the inside of his wrist, directly over the rapid beat of his pulse. "You are still afraid?" the Alpha murmured. "But not of me." Before Elliot could answer, the window behind them exploded. Glass burst through the ballroom in a silver wave. Grant pulled him down, but Elliot had already twisted, one hand catching the Alpha's collar as the other reached beneath the banquet table. His fingers closed around a fallen dinner knife. The gunshot arrived a heartbeat later. A bullet tore through the chair where Grant's chest had been. Screams filled the room. Elliot dragged Grant behind a stone column, then raised the knife beside his cheek in a grip no sheltered Omega should have known. Across the ballroom, beyond the broken window, a shadow shifted on the opposite rooftop. Elliot calculated distance, wind, and escape routes without thinking. When he turned, Grant was watching him instead of the shooter. Not shocked, not grateful, interested. His gaze moved from Elliot's steady hand to the blade, positioned for a killing strike. Then his mouth curved into a smile that held no warmth. "What kind of fragile Omega," Grant asked, "was taught to hold a knife like that?" The bullet had missed Grant by less than 2 inches. By the time Callaway guards reached the opposite rooftop, the shooter was gone. Only a dismantled rifle remained beneath a ventilation unit, wiped clean and positioned with professional care. No fingerprints, no self-gassing, no abandoned equipment beyond what the assassin wanted them to find. Inside the ballroom, the celebration had become a crime scene. Guests were escorted into separate rooms. Staff members knelt beneath armed supervision, while security teams searched walls, ceilings, service passages, and ventilation shafts. The shattered window had been covered with a temporary steel panel, though cold night air still seeped through the fractured frame. Elliot sat in the bridal suite with Grant standing between him and the locked door. The room had been prepared for romance. Rose petals covered the bed. Candles burned beside an unopened bottle of champagne. Silk curtains softened the city lights beyond the glass. Now 3 guards waited outside, and a pistol rested against Grant's hip. The contrast would have been amusing under different circumstances. Elliot kept both hands visible on his lap. The dinner knife had been taken from him downstairs. Grant had not spoken for several minutes. He moved around Elliot with the patience of a hunter examining unfamiliar tracks. There was no rage in his posture. Anger would have been easier. Anger created openings. This silence measured everything. "You recognize the poison," Grant finally said. Elliot lowered his gaze. "I noticed the reaction on the tray. A frightened groom would have screamed. I thought panic might alert him. So you collapsed into my arms." "It worked." Grant stopped behind him. Elliot felt the alpha's attention settle between his shoulder blades. "You also identified the direction of the shooter before the glass broke." "I saw movement. Across another building." The window reflected it. Grant walked into view again. "And the knife?" Elliot allowed uncertainty to enter his expression. "I grabbed the nearest object." "You held it in reverse grip." The words landed softly. Elliot said nothing. Grant leaned against the dressing table, studying him beneath the muted glow of the lamps. Without the public ceremony around him, he seemed less like a groom and more like the man who ruled half the city's criminal trade routes. His suit jacket was gone. The sleeves of his black shirt had been folded to his forearms. A narrow cut crossed one cheek where flying glass had touched him. Elliot forced himself not to look at the wound for too long. In the original novel, Grant had been portrayed as merciless, suspicious, and impossible to deceive. The description had not been exaggerated. "I read your medical records," Grant said. "Chronic respiratory weakness, limited physical education, frequent fainting episodes, no travel outside Mercer property without supervision. That is what the documents say." Grant's eyes narrowed. An unusual answer. Before Elliot could repair the mistake, a faint metallic click came from the wall behind the bed. His body reacted before thought intervened. He crossed the room, swept aside the hanging fabric, and pressed 2 fingers beneath the carved wooden frame. A small black device slipped into his palm. A transmitter. Grant appeared beside him. Neither man spoke. The device was smaller than a coin, with a pulsing green light along one edge. Elliot removed the casing using a hairpin from the vanity, then disconnected the power cell. Grant watched every movement. "You have done this before." Elliot placed the pieces on the table. "Apparently your security is not as flawless as people claim." A dangerous quiet filled the room, and the transmitter crackled back to life. Elliot froze. The power source had already been removed. A recorded voice emerged through the miniature speaker. His voice, soft, controlled, familiar despite carrying a cadence that did not belong to him. "I will kill Grant Callaway after the wedding." Static followed, then another sentence. "When he trusts me, I will open the house from within." Grant slowly turned toward him. Elliot stared at the device, unable to hide his shock. That recording had not been made by him. It belonged to the man who had lived in this body before the transmigration, the original Elliot Mercer. Grant drew his pistol. He did not point it immediately. He held it low, his finger resting beside the trigger. "Tell me," he said, "why your voice is giving orders to my assassin." Elliot's thoughts moved rapidly through every possible explanation. None could survive serious investigation. A heavy impact struck the door. One of the guards shouted outside. Another sound followed, short and wet, then silence. Grant raised the weapon. Elliot reached beneath the vanity and pulled free the narrow blade he had noticed when entering. The handle fit his palm perfectly. The lock began to turn. Grant glanced at him, taking in the weapon, the balanced stance, and the absence of hesitation. This time, Elliot did not pretend to tremble. "Whatever comes through that door," he whispered, "is not here for only one of us." The handle lowered. Grant moved beside him rather than ordering him back. For the first time since their vows, they faced the same direction. The door opened 3 inches before Grant fired. A body collapsed through the gap. Not an attacker, one of the guards. Blood darkened the front of his shirt, spreading beneath his vest as he struck the carpet. Behind him, the corridor stood empty. Grant crossed the room first, weapon raised, scanning both directions. Elliot followed without waiting for permission. The second guard lay near the stairwell, unconscious but breathing. A thin puncture marked the side of his neck. "Sedative," Elliot said. Grant looked at him. Elliot regretted the certainty in his voice. "You recognized that quickly. I have seen similar wounds." "In the Mercer estate?" No, the answer came too fast. Grant closed the suite door and dragged the injured man inside. He secured the lock with a chair beneath the handle, then returned to the transmitter on the table. Elliot could still hear the recording. His own voice promising murder. Except it was not his. He touched his throat, as if the truth might be hidden beneath the skin. The body remembered things his mind did not. Sometimes his fingers reached, automatically for weapons. Sometimes he woke knowing exits he had never examined. He had assumed those instincts belonged entirely to his former life. Now he was no longer certain. Grant replayed the message. "I will kill Grant Calloway after the wedding." The tone was calm, but beneath it lived something else. Fear. The speaker had been careful, perhaps too careful. Each word sounded rehearsed. Forced. Elliot stepped closer. "Play the ending again." Grant did. Static hissed after the final sentence. Beneath it came 3 faint knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Elliot's breath caught. A code. Not Black Halo's standard signal, but close enough to recognize the structure. Someone wanted that message discovered, he said. Grant's attention shifted from the device dam. "You understand it?" "Not completely. That is becoming your favorite answer." Elliot ignored the remark. He crossed to the wall beside the bed and studied the carved panels. The first 3 knocks had been evenly spaced. The next 2 had come closer together. 3. Pause. 2. Third panel. Second section. He pressed the wood. Nothing happened. Grant approached, but Elliot raised a hand to stop him. He ran his fingertips along the lower molding until he found a shallow notch. A concealed compartment opened with a muted snap. Inside lay a narrow leather journal. The cover bore no name. Elliot's hands became unsteady when he opened it. The handwriting matched the signature on the marriage certificate. The first pages described medicines, appointments, and the Mercer family's debts. Later, entries changed. The lines grew hurried. Names appeared without explanation. Shipping dates. License numbers. Meetings held beneath warehouses and abandoned churches. Then came Black Halo. "They chose me because no one fears a sick Omega." Elliot swallowed. Grant read over his shoulder. The original owner of this body had not been merely a sheltered victim. He had been recruited, trained, and planted inside the Calloway marriage. Yet the final pages told a different story. "I accepted the assignment because they threatened my younger cousin. I was supposed to earn Grant's trust, disable the estate, and mark the Eastern entrance. I thought he was the monster they described." A later entry had been written in uneven ink. "He paid the Mercer debt before the contract was signed. He ordered the servants not to touch me without permission. He does not know I heard Sterling discussing the memorial attack." Elliot turned the page. The final sentence stopped halfway across the paper. "If I die before I can warn him, the poison is in." Nothing followed. A dark stain covered the lower corner. Grant took the journal from him. His face revealed little, but his grip tightened around the spine. "You knew none of this." It was not quite a question. Elliot met his eyes. "I knew someone wanted you dead. I did not know this body had already been part of the plan." This body, the phrase remained between them. Grant noticed everything. Elliot looked away. "I mean this life. No, you did not. Before Grant could press further, his phone vibrated. A convoy waited below. The estate was no longer secure, and the remaining guards recommended moving immediately to a protected location. Grant handed Elliot a coat. You are coming with me. Am I a prisoner? You are either bait, an accomplice, or the only person in this house who can identify what is happening. And which do you believe? Grant opened the door. I have not decided. They entered the armored car 10 minutes later. Grant sat opposite Elliot, one hand near his concealed pistol. Rain streaked across the dark windows as the vehicle left the gates. Elliot watched the driver's posture. Too rigid. No movement in the shoulders. No reflection of breathing against the partition glass. He leaned forward. The man's head shifted with the motion of the road, revealing a thin red line beneath his collar. Elliot's blood turned cold. Grant, he said, reaching for the door controls. The driver was dead before we left the garage. Cut the engine, Elliot said. Grant did not question him. He reached beneath the seat, tore open the emergency panel, and pulled 2 wires free. Nothing changed. The limousine continued accelerating through the rain, its tires slicing across the flooded road with increasing force. The dashboard glowed without a driver's touch. Remote control. Ahead, the highway curved toward an unfinished bridge. Beyond the concrete barrier waited open air and the black river below. Elliot moved across the rear cabin. He shoved the divider aside and caught the dead driver before the body folded over the wheel. A needle had entered beneath the jaw, precise enough to stop the heart without staining the uniform. The steering column resisted him. Electronic lock, Grant said. Then break the system. Grant fired into the console. Sparks burst across the front compartment. The vehicle swerved, struck the guardrail, and returned to its lane. The wheel remained fixed toward the bridge. 300 yards. Elliot ripped away the lower covering and searched through cables by touch. Rain hammered the roof. Warning lights flashed across the interior, staining Grant's face in alternating red and white. You know what you're looking for, Grant said. I know what will kill us. 200 yards. Elliot found the override relay beneath the ignition housing. It had been replaced with a military-grade receiver. Someone had planned this long before the wedding. He drove the stolen blade into the mechanism. The current struck his arm. Pain tore through his shoulder, but he held on until the receiver cracked. The steering wheel jerked loose. Grant seized it from the passenger side. The limousine crossed the final barrier and angle. One side lifted from the ground. For a breathless second, the river filled the windshield. Grant turned hard. The rear of the car smashed through construction fencing, spun across wet concrete, and slammed sideways into a stack of steel beams. Glass fractured. Metal screamed. Elliot struck the door and tasted blood. Silence followed. Then gunfire struck the roof. Grant dragged him down as bullets punched through the upper frame. They were waiting, Elliot said. Of course they were. The doors had locked during impact. Grant kicked the nearest one twice before the warped metal gave way. They crawled beneath the wreckage while another burst shattered the remaining windows. The bridge foundation offered little cover. Rain swept through the unfinished structure, turning dust into mud. Beneath their hands, 4 men advanced from the lower access road. Black clothing, suppressed rifles, no visible insignia. Grant fired twice. One attacker dropped behind a concrete block. The others separated with trained coordination. Elliot counted their positions. One near the support column, another moving toward the stairs, the third covering Grant. The fourth remained unseen. A sniper. Stay here, Grant ordered. Elliot almost laughed. Instead, he slipped beneath the hanging tarp and descended the scaffolding. His injured arm protested with every movement, but the old discipline returned without permission. Balance. Timing. Silence. The first attacker never saw him. Elliot landed behind the man, trapped a rifle against his chest, and drove an elbow into the base of his skull. Before the body reached the ground, Elliot had taken a weapon. He fired once toward the stairwell. The second man recoiled, hit through the shoulder. Grant finished him from above. The third charged from the side. Elliot dropped the rifle and met him at close range. The assassin swung a knife toward his ribs. Elliot caught the wrist, turned beneath the arm, and forced the joint beyond its limit. Bone gave with a dull snap. The man screamed. Elliot silenced him with one strike to the throat. When he looked up, Grant stood several feet away. Rain streamed from his hair and collar. His pistol remained aimed past Elliot, but his attention was fixed entirely on him. There was no room left for weakness now. No trembling hands. No uncertain posture. Elliot stood over two trained killers, breathing evenly, a stolen blade resting against his palm as naturally as a wedding ring. A red point appeared on Grant's chest. Elliot saw it first. He crossed the distance and drove Grant behind a pillar as the sniper fired. Stone exploded beside them. Grant caught Elliot by the waist before he fell. For one suspended moment, they remained pressed together beneath the concrete shelter, both listening for the next shot. Grant's hand tightened at Elliot's back. "My medical records," Elliot said, forcing air into his lungs, "were accurate once. Once, I was weak before, and now." Elliot glanced toward the upper framework, tracking the sniper's probable angle. "Now I remember how to survive." Grant studied his face with a look more unsettling than suspicion. Recognition. He removed a compact pistol from his ankle holster and placed it in Elliot's hand. The gesture carried more meaning than trust. It made them equals. "Then survive beside me," Grant said. Elliot checked the magazine, stepped from cover, and aimed toward the shadows above. The fragile Omega Grant Calloway had married no longer existed. Perhaps he never had. "You are not leaving my sight again." Grant delivered the order inside a private medical suite beneath Calloway Tower. The room had no windows, no decorative furniture, and no visible exits beyond the reinforced door. White panels concealed emergency equipment behind seamless walls. A single examination bed stood beneath recessed lights while two armed guards waited outside. Elliot sat on the edge of the mattress as a physician wrapped his injured shoulder. The electrical burn had left an angry mark across his forearm. Bruises darkened his ribs where the limousine had thrown him against the door. None of it concerned him as much as the man standing near the opposite wall. Grant had changed into a dry shirt, though rain still clung to the ends of his hair. A shallow cut crossed his brow. He had refused treatment until every weapon, transmitter, and tracking device recovered from the bridge had been cataloged. Now he watched Elliot with the same concentration he might give a rival organization. The physician finished the bandage and departed without speaking. Grant locked the door behind him. Elliot flexed his fingers. "Keeping me under observation will not stop the next attack. No, it will stop you from disappearing before I receive answers. I saved your life. You also dismantled military equipment, disarmed trained killers, and recognized an assassination code hidden beneath a recording in your own voice." Grant approached the table between them and placed two objects on its surface. The leather journal, a compact pistol. "You may explain either one first." Elliot looked at the gun. "Is that an invitation or a threat?" "A choice." Grant's expression remained unreadable, yet the weapon had been positioned with its grip facing Elliot, not the placement of a captor, the placement of a negotiator. Elliot rose slowly. "I know enough to predict certain events. Not everything. The sequence is changing." "How?" "Because I interfered." Grant waited. Elliot could not tell him about another world, a novel, or waking inside a life destined to end. Not yet. Truth without proof sounded like madness, and Grant Calloway did not build his empire on faith. "The person who lived as Elliot Mercer before the wedding knew more than his family admitted," he said. "He was connected to Black Halo. He accepted an assignment against you, then changed his mind. You speak about yourself as though he were someone else." Elliot held Grant's gaze. Perhaps he was. A long silence followed. Grant did not laugh. That unsettled Elliot more than disbelief would have. Instead, the Alpha opened the journal to the final page. Sterling appears 6 times. Elliot stepped closer. Grant pointed to shipping dates, warehouse numbers, and abbreviated meeting locations. Every entry matches a route compromised during the past year. Only 4 people had access to all of them. Sterling was one. Yes. And the others? My brother, my operations chief, and me. Elliot studied the notes. Then Sterling either betrayed you or wanted the original Elliot to believe he had. Grant's attention sharpened. You understand why that distinction matters. A man who controls information can frame anyone standing near it. For the first time, something resembling approval entered Grant's face. He slid a tablet across the table. Maps, financial records, security schedules, and personnel files filled the screen. Temporary access, he said. Every action will be monitored. Elliot looked up. You are giving a suspected assassin access to your organization? I'm giving a useful suspect enough rope to reveal what he wants. And if I find a traitor, you tell me before you act. Elliot nearly smiled. You assume I follow orders. I assume you prefer survival. They established terms before dawn. Elliot would share every detail he remembered about the planned attacks. Grant would provide records tied to Black Halo. Neither would conceal evidence, act alone, or use phenomenal authority during questioning. The final condition came from Elliot. No distrans, no lag vedrom. No one touches me without permission. Grant answered immediately. Agreed. The speed of it caught Elliot off guard. Most alphas in this world treated omega boundaries as obstacles. Grant accepted them as law. Hours later, Elliot entered the secured bedroom assigned to him. The room had been searched twice. Fresh clothes waited beside the bed. A meal sat untouched beneath a silver cover. A faint sweetness drifted from the ventilation grate. Elliot stopped. Not perfume, not cleaning solution. An artificial heat catalyst. His pulse changed before he could reach the control panel. Warmth spread beneath his skin, sudden and invasive. His knees weakened. The door opened. Grant entered, took one breath, and understood. His pupils widened. His alpha sense surged, then vanished as he forced it down with brutal control. Elliot caught the edge of the desk. Someone dosed the ventilation. Grant crossed the room, shut off the system, and called for the physician. Then he removed his jacket, placed it around Elliot's shoulders, and stepped back. He did not touch him again, even when Elliot's instincts begged for proximity, even when the drug turned every nerve into a plea. Grant remained beside the door until medical staff arrived, keeping everyone else away. That was the moment Elliot's plan began to fail. He had prepared for suspicion, violence, and betrayal. He had not prepared for restraint. The catalyst was neutralized before dawn. Dr. Owen Hart, a beta physician chosen from outside the Callaway network, stayed in the room until Elliot's temperature returned to normal. Grant remained beyond the glass wall. He never entered, even when the drug made Elliot call his name. When Elliot finally asked him to come closer, Grant stopped beside the bed and waited for a second permission before taking his hand. You could have used the heat to force the bond the contract promised you, Elliot said. Grant's thumb rested motionless against his knuckles. A response created by poison would not be consent. That answer destroyed the last safe distance Elliot had built inside himself. He had known how to survive a cruel alpha. The novel had prepared him for that man. It had not prepared him for one who could stand close enough to claim everything and deliberately claim nothing. Grant released him when the monitors stabilized. Now tell me the truth. Elliot looked at the dark window, then at the journal left on the medical table. There was no version of the truth that sounded reasonable, so he gave Grant the unreasonable one. He described the other world, the novel, his death beneath the wheels of a bus after pushing a stranger out of its path, and the moment he opened his eyes inside Elliot Mercer's body. He explained that he had spent 12 years as a close protection officer and security instructor. He had guarded diplomats, trained emergency teams, and learned to see a weapon before the person carrying it decided to use it. He also told Grant about the ending. In the original story, Elliot dies in 90 days, he said. You die at his memorial service. Grant did not laugh. Who kills me? The book never names him. It says you drink a final toast beside Elliot's portrait. Then the room fills with smoke, and you collapse before your guards understand that the attack has begun. Grant looked toward the unfinished sentence in the journal. If I die before I can warn him, the poison is in. The poison is not in a glass, he said. No, the wedding attack already taught them you would test every drink. Then we have 90 days to find where the smoke comes from. Elliot corrected him. We have less. The plot changed when I saved you tonight. Grant met his eyes. Then we stopped following the plot. They began with the original Elliot's journal. The shipping numbers led not to weapons, but to ceremonial supplies purchased by Callaway Funeral Homes. Black Halo had ordered rare incense resin, silver burners, ventilation filters, and mourning candles through companies controlled by Adrian Sterling, Grant's operations chief. Each purchase looked ordinary on its own. Together, they formed the exact inventory required for a crowded memorial. Sterling denied everything. His records were clean, his loyalty documented across 15 years, and his scent never changed during questioning. Grant wanted to detain him. Elliot insisted they wait. If he is guilty, fear will make him destroy the route leading to everyone above him. And if he attacks again, we let him believe we are still looking in the wrong place. Grant hated the strategy. He accepted it because Elliot had not asked for blind faith. He had provided a reason. The first personal clue came from a page that appeared blank beneath normal light. When Elliot held it near the medical scanner, silver writing emerged between the fibers. Mateo knows where the first contract is buried. Daniel Mercer was Elliot's 24-year-old cousin, the man Black Halo had threatened when they recruited the original owner of the body. Official records claim Mateo had left the country 6 months earlier. Border logs showed no departure. Grant arranged a secure call to Lionel Mercer, Elliot's father. Lionel answered from the family estate with grief polished into dignity. He insisted Mateo was traveling and accused Grant of making Elliot unstable. Elliot listened without speaking until Lionel used the phrase, "Delicate boys should not dig beneath family graves." The call ended. Grant looked at him. He told us where to search. The Mercer crypt. They went together. Elliot refused a convoy large enough to announce their arrival, and Grant refused to let him enter an unsecured site alone. Their compromise consisted of one armored vehicle, 2 beta officers waiting outside the cemetery, and live audio transmitted to Dr. Hart and an independent investigator. The crypt stood beneath a ruined chapel on Mercer land. No bodies rested inside. Behind the central memorial stone, they found a steel archive containing the original marriage contract, Black Halo payment records, and footage of Lionel negotiating with Sterling. The recording revealed the design. Lionel would place Elliot inside the Callaway household. Sterling would provide schedules and security access. Black Halo would eliminate Grant during the chaos. Following Elliot's death, the two families would blame one another, and Sterling would take control of the ports while Lionel's debts disappeared. The final video showed Mateo alive in a windowless room. A speaker activated above the archive. "You should have remained the obedient husband," Sterling said. The crypt door sealed. Sweet smoke entered through narrow openings in the stone. Grant pulled Elliot's filtration mask over his face before securing his own. They had expected poison and carried sealed respirators. They had not expected the floor to open. Grant fell first. Elliot caught his wrist, but the unfamiliar body lacked the strength to hold an alpha's full weight. Grant struck the lower platform and rolled before armed men emerged from the darkness. Elliot descended after him instead of remaining above. They fought back-to-back through the narrow chamber. Grant controlled distance and protected the only exit. Elliot used the walls, low ceiling, and attackers' momentum against them. Neither tried to become the other's shield. They moved as partners who trusted each other to recognize danger. Sterling escaped through a service tunnel, but he left the archive behind. Mateo was found in an adjacent room, sedated but alive. When he woke, he recognized Elliot's face and began crying. "You came," Mateo whispered. Elliot did not pretend to be the cousin Mateo remembered. "Someone inside this body fought to leave me a path to you." Mateo studied him for a long time. Then he took Elliot's offer hand. "That sounds like him." The recovered evidence was strong enough to expose Lionel's financial role, but not enough to reach the council members protecting Black Halo. Sterling vanished, taking the list of senior conspirators with him. Grant could have ordered every Callaway soldier into the city. Instead, he asked Elliot what the original story required next. "A death," Elliot answered. then a memorial. They decided to give the story exactly what it expected, without giving a victim. On the 87th day of the marriage, the Calloway household announced that Elliot Mercer had died from complications caused by the artificial heat attack. Dr. Hart signed a sealed medical notice stating only that Elliot was no longer under treatment. The wording was true. Independent officers moved Elliot to a protected apartment beneath the old courthouse, while Grant prepared a private memorial. The announcement changed the city overnight. Lionel arrived at Calloway Tower, wearing mourning black and performing the grief of a father who believed his son had finally become useful. Sterling sent a message offering to return for the sake of family stability. Funeral suppliers requested access to the ballroom. 3 council members who had avoided Grant for years confirmed their attendance. Black Halo was moving toward the ending it had planned. Grant visited Elliot on the night before the memorial. He came without guards and placed a folder on the table. "Divorce papers," he said. "Signed by me. No debt, no property transfer, and no condition requiring you to remain after tomorrow." Elliot opened the file. "You think one of us will die. I think you should enter the room knowing you are not bound to me." The marriage contract had brought them together as property and owner. Grant was removing it before asking Elliot to trust him with his life. Elliot signed, then slid the papers back. "Tomorrow I enter as your partner, not your husband." Grant's expression tightened around an emotion he did not try to name. "And afterward? Ask me when we have an afterward." The memorial filled the same ballroom where the wedding had nearly ended in murder. Elliot's portrait stood above an arrangement of white flowers. Silver burners waited beside each column. Guests in black moved beneath the chandeliers while Grant accepted condolences with his face turned to stone. Elliot watched through the security feed from a service room 1 floor below. Mateo sat beside him, protected by Dr. Hart and 2 independent officers. Every burner had been replaced with harmless resin, and each ventilation line carried hidden sensors. Grant's whiskey contained colored water. The guards knew that Sterling might be inside, but only Elliot knew how the novel described the final minute. A final toast beside the portrait. Smoke. Grant reaching for his throat. A bell, ringing 3 times. The clock approached midnight. Lionel raised his glass first. "To my son, whose sacrifice brought peace between our houses." Grant did not drink. The first bell rang. The sensors remained clear. The second bell rang. A server near the portrait adjusted 1 white flower. Elliot enlarged the image. The man's gloves were wrong. Funeral staff wore gray. His were black. "North column," Elliot said into the channel. "The flowers are the trigger." Grant turned toward the portrait. The third bell rang. Tiny vents opened inside the flower arrangement. The poison had never been in the incense. It was hidden in the memorial wreath, positioned close enough to Grant that public ventilation tests would miss the first concentrated release. Grant swept the arrangement from the platform and covered the vents with his jacket. Security barriers descended around the ballroom. Guests shouted and moved toward the exits. Sterling removed the server's mask. He held a remote in one hand and a pistol in the other. "You were supposed to drink at your husband's grave." "My husband is not dead," Grant said. Sterling's face changed. Elliot stepped onto the balcony above the ballroom. He had left the protected room the moment the first bell rang, following a route agreed upon with Grant. He wore a black suit instead of ceremonial white. No veil, no Omega jewels, and no symbol of the Mercer family remained on him. Lionel stared upward. "What are you?" "The man your son trusted to finish what he began." Sterling pressed the remote. Nothing happened. Mateo had replaced its receiver while Elliot occupied the conspirators' attention. Every screen in the ballroom illuminated with the recordings recovered from the crypt. Lionel's payments, Sterling's security transfers, Black Halo's funeral purchases, and the names of council members who had financed the operation. The broadcast reached law enforcement, rival syndicates, independent media, and every guest's personal device. Sterling aimed at Elliot. Grant stood close enough to shoot him. Instead, he saw Lionel dragging Mateo toward the northern exit. Grant abandoned the clean shot and intercepted Lionel before he could take another hostage. That choice mattered more than any declaration of love. Grant chose the living person in danger instead of revenge. Sterling fired. Elliot moved before the muzzle flash. The bullet struck the balcony rail. He crossed the distance, trapped Sterling's wrist against the stone, and drove the remote from his hand. Sterling was stronger than he expected and nearly forced the pistol back toward Elliot's chest. Grant did not command Elliot to move. He waited for an opening. Elliot created one. Grant disarmed Sterling without firing. Independent officers secured him, Lionel, and the 3 council members before the ballroom doors reopened. The remaining guests left through clean air corridors under medical supervision. No one died at the memorial that was supposed to complete the story. By sunrise, Black Halo had lost its protected accounts, funeral network, and political shield. Mateo testified about his captivity. Dr. Hart authenticated the artificial heat compound. The original Elliot's journal established that he had acted under coercion and then risked his life to protect Grant. His name was cleared publicly. Elliot attended the declaration without pretending that the restored reputation belonged to him. Elliot Mercer saved Grant before I arrived, he told the investigators. I only made certain the world finally understood it. 3 months later, Grant transferred every asset named in the marriage agreement into an independent restitution fund for people coerced by criminal family contracts. He dissolved the clause that allowed alpha spouses to control an Omega's residence, medical decisions, or finances. Other families followed only after public pressure made refusal expensive. Elliot did not care why they changed. He cared that the next husband would have legal ground on which to say no. He moved into his own apartment. Grant did not place guards outside it. He provided a secure number and waited. Their first real date took place in a small restaurant with no private room and no armed men visible at the door. Grant arrived early. Elliot noticed the 2 security officers across the street, but decided not to complain. Grant was learning. So was he. Are you here because the novel says we fall in love? Grant asked. The novel says we die. Then it has been unreliable. Elliot smiled. I am here because you opened the door when you had the power to lock it. Grant reached across the table, then stopped before touching his hand. May I? Elliot closed the remaining distance himself. A year after the false memorial, they returned to the ballroom. There was no political audience, no debt settlement, and no poisoned toast. Mateo and Dr. Hart signed as witnesses. Grant offered no ownership vow. Ellos promised no obedience. They chose a simple agreement that either man could end without losing his name, home, or freedom. When Grant kissed him, he did so only after Elliot answered yes. The original story had given them 90 days to die. They used those days to expose a conspiracy, release a man trapped inside a false reputation, and dismantle the contract that had mistaken marriage for possession. Elliot had entered the world determined to survive Grant Calloway. He remained because Grant learned that loving him did not mean keeping him. For the first time, neither man belonged to a family, a syndicate, or a predetermined ending. They belonged beside each other only for as long as both continued to choose it.